everyone, and welcome to the Newsagent podcast. I'm Susie Lysett, Senior Content Executive at Goodlord, and this episode is a recording of our Renters Reform Bill White Paper webinar Q&A, which unexpectedly fell on the day that Boris Johnson resigned as Prime Minister in the wake of numerous government resignations and the sacking of the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove. So this webinar's turned out to be pretty well timed to go through what this may mean for the Renters Reform Bill going forwards. Sean Hooker, Head of Redress at the Property Redress Scheme, and Goodlord's Ollie Sherlock were the expert webinar hosts, so let's hear what they had to say about these latest developments.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this instalment of the Renters Reform Bill White Paper live Q&A with our very good friend Sean Hooker. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's been an eventful 24 hours, and we're going to be trying to dissect some of those events in the next sort of 30 minutes to an hour. We're going to split the webinar into a couple of different sections today, given recent events. I've got Sarah supporting us on the slides this morning. Good morning, Sarah. Hopefully we can go on to the next slide, please. For those of you joining who don't know who Goodlord are, trust me, this is definitely the only Goodlord pitch today. We've got lots to talk about and lots of breaking news. Goodlord is a pre-tenancy platform that helps you streamline and automate your pre-tenancy process, allowing you to do things like paying rent, signing documents, contracts, paying deposits, and also supporting subsidiary services like rent protection, insurance, tenancy services, etc. If you want to find out more about how Goodlord can help your business, then please do visit our website and we can take you through a demo and consult with you and see how we can support your business, especially in these ever-changing times. That's it on Goodlord. Let's get on to today's agenda, and I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Sean Hooker. Sean, good morning.
Good morning, Ollie. How are you?
I'm very good. A little tired. Weirdly, I stayed up later than normal last night to watch the news. Much to my wife's disappointment and annoyance. So it's been a funny 24 hours. But before we get into that, Sean, for those who are joining who don't know who you are, can you just give us a brief introduction, please?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Hooker. I am Head of Redress for the Property Redress Scheme, which is one of the two authorised complaint services that letting agents, property managers and estate agents must be a member of. So I'm part of Hamilton Fraser Group, which also you may have heard of products such as Landlord Action and Total Landlord Insurance. And of course, we have Landlord Action as part of our stable. We bought that off the Mr. Paul Champolina, who I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot from in the next few days as this saga develops.
I think Paul's busy evicting somebody at the moment, isn't he, this morning?
I saw a lovely tweet from him. A lovely post from him outside, photoshopped outside of number 10.
I saw the same tweet, yes. And I think Russell Quirk was the first one to sort of make the comparison to where's Paul Champolina when you need him, or something along the lines of that. But indeed, it's going to be remiss to ignore what has happened in the last 24 hours. So we have amended our agenda accordingly. So we are going to sort of just to discuss how the government changes we think affect the reform bill. We're going to major on some of the proposals. So for the people attending, you may remember we did a session similar to this only a few weeks ago, where we essentially, I think within sort of 48 hours of the white paper being released, Sean and I went through the 82 odd pages in that paper and dissected it for you, discussed it, and indeed that was an extremely lively session. We overran by some time, and scores of questions came in. We're going to try and focus on a couple of points that we think are pertinent. And actually, as the dust has settled, the points that we think are pertinent to you as letting agents, and try and focus on those and discuss those. And as I said before, the Q&A is open. So please do throw us your questions. Any aspect of this, any aspect of the industry, actually, we'll try our best to answer them. You also have a poll that should have gone up. If you could gladly answer that, intrigued to understand your thoughts on those questions, and we'll be running through that at the end of the session as well. But let's return back to the last 24 hours then, Sean. So breaking news this morning in the last 15 odd minutes, Johnson has come out to say he's going to resign. There's been over 50 resignations in the last 24 odd hours. Where does this leave us when we're thinking particularly about the rent reform bill?
Well, first of all, and you said that you weren't, there was only going to be one plug of Goodlord. I'm going to give you another little one there. I've dug out the T-shirt you sent me last year, okay, and just before we do anything else, and I know the numbers are down slightly from what we had from the last time, and rightly so, because probably people are either glued to the television or radio or in board meetings now kind of discussing what does this all mean for themselves. But look, the message out there is that we're no different than where we were even a couple of days ago, because the white paper is not a bill. It's not something that's going through Parliament at the moment. It is something that was open for discussion. So reality is where we are at the moment is we don't really know. What we know is that there is nobody. The lights are on at DLUC, but nobody's home. I understand that Eddie Hughes was one of the few ministers not to have handed in his resignation. He had a busy day yesterday, apparently still doing stuff in the property market arena. So he's the only one kind of like manning the desks at the moment. But the reality is that if I was a civil servant now, you would be thinking, well, what do we do now? Because we don't really have any instructions on how to go forward. I would suspect that they would try and be business as usual, and whatever work they're undertaking now. And my understanding is, I was speaking to Ben Beadle the other day, is he understands that large parts of the bill are in draft form. So I presume that would just tick over as it's going on. But until you've actually got somebody to sign it off, and we don't know who is going to be in the position of being the permanent secretary for housing, we don't know that. We don't know what the structure of the office will be. We don't know what the interim plans are even going to be, because at the moment, what Boris is saying is that he wants to stay on until autumn, which is the autumn conferences. So I'm assuming that the leadership elections will go over the summer, and they'll announce their new leader, the new prime minister, around about the conference time.
So let's just talk about that point, because if Boris does do that, I think there's two schools of opinion here. Boris stays on until autumn, sees it through, a bit like May did when she lost the vote of no confidence, or indeed was ousted. Sorry. We then have a world where we don't have ministers in place, or it's going to be very hard to think that any minister worth their salt is going to jump in and do that job as an interim job, knowing there's a change of leadership. So that's an interesting quandary. But also we have scores of PPSs that have resigned as well, that, as we were saying previously, are doing a lot of the legwork below this. There's 150, I think, odd bills already in processing. We had a timeline of March the last time we spoke, which I think was well informed, and we thought the royal assent would probably come in October. Surely this pushes the reform bill back.
Right, you would expect so, because of the work that needs to be done to get it absolutely prepared. However, I'm going to be controversial and say that it could mean we see some of these changes far sooner than we may have anticipated, because the new leader may want to push forward and get something to show that they've done something. Now, the reality is we've got a situation, and we're second guessing this. This is a vote of no confidence in Boris, the Prime Minister. This is not necessarily a vote of confidence in the direction and the agenda and the manifesto of the government. Okay, so we don't know that, and whether you agree with it or not, this was this has all been part of the bigger plan. The levelling up and the housing is part of that levelling up agenda. Is a core part of the government's agenda. So, is this a vote now against the direction of travel, or is it just a vote against the leader at the moment? If it's the latter, then the new leader will sign up to the agenda, and it will just be a change of the boss, but the company strategy so far will remain the same. If that's the case, and the whole part of this white paper was to telegraph the process, or compress the process into a shorter period, you could see it's still sticking to its agenda. and pushing forward something so that there's something on the on the statute books for when the new leader eventually goes to the poll.
And I'm intrigued with everybody who's attended the webinar today as letting agents. Please do give us your thoughts on the Q&A around whether actually you don't mind this being something that either sits and wilts a little bit, or indeed you feel relatively apprehensive about it being rushed through and prioritised as a standard mark of the new leader's qualities. Because I think what was clear in the last webinar we did with one, a huge attendance and huge amounts of questions, the sentiment was very clear. There was a level of nervousness from what we saw around some of the changes. There is clearly necessity for clarification around a lot of points, and I think we've picked out a few points later on in the session today that we can clarify a bit more on from where we were 2 or 3 weeks ago, which hopefully is helpful. But I think it's fair to say the letting agents, didn't read the white paper and didn't go through the consultation pieces and thought this was a glowing indictment of the necessity to be a landlord. And actually, a lot of the conversations I've had following that session and following the white paper are more along the lines of, I'm very concerned with how this is going to affect landlords. So I'm intrigued to understand the people who are joining today, what your thoughts are and what your sentiment is towards the bill. Now we've got 3 odd weeks in, and it's maybe sort of had time to digest. Do you actually care if it's pushed back a bit? Is that arguably a good thing for you as a letting agent in your view? Intrigued to know what the attendees' views are there, Sean. Let's talk about Michael Gove, because I think it's very easy in the last 24 hours to take a negative connotation in the way the country is being run. This is unprecedented times. We've had mass resignations, and I think your point around this being an indictment of Boris Johnson more so than the government, I think is a fair one, given the fact that every man and his dog last night was saying to Mr. Johnson, you should probably resign, and he seemed to be digging in further. That tone seems to have changed this morning, although maybe it hasn't happened just yet from what I'm reading on the news down here. But Michael Gove came in, and it's probably worth some praise, because if you look at what he set out to do as the Minister for the Department of Levelling Up, he actually solved and dealt with quite a few of the issues in a way that many haven't before him. The cladding issue, for example, I think is a good testament to that. And indeed, he delivered a white paper on the Renters Reform Bill when they said they would. Even you, Sean, came on months ago and said they said it'd be by this time, and it was indeed. So the loss of Michael Gove within the Department of Levelling Up, how influential is that in terms of, one, getting things done in your view, but also the fact that he seemed to have an understanding and an ability to really cut through and actually get things like the cladding crisis actually at the forefront of people's minds and getting something done about it?
I mean, it's going to be very strange. And Michael Gove is, he's the ultimate Marmite character, isn't he? But what you cannot say about Michael Gove is he's indecisive. He is the most, when he's made his mind up, he is the most determined person to get things done. If you want something done, you bring in Michael Gove. Call him a fixer, call him whatever you want. The thing I think, though, however, that he may have learned is that that he may never get the coveted prize, and people surrounding him will say, well, actually, Michael, for whatever your talents, you're not ever going to have the popularity either within the Conservative Party or to the nations to take the job. So that could mean that he could be the kingmaker or the facilitator, and it's going to be very interesting. And I think a lot of political commentary, which is way outside of my pay grade, will start to happen. But if you were thinking of the logic now of salvaging this situation for the country, I'm talking about, not just the government, because we need a functioning government. We don't need a general election at this stage. I don't think any of us would welcome that. Even the opposition, I don't think would welcome that. So Michael Gove could be the key. So how he's integrated into this interim situation while they decide who their new leader is going to be paramount. That's my initial thoughts, but this is changing every minute. So by this afternoon, I may sound completely off the agenda on this one.
No, indeed, and to that point, Kevin has put a statement in the Q&A. Thank you, and good morning, Kevin. To say that actually Boris is making a statement. It's been confirmed by number 10 later today. So that does definitely sound like we are out of the gossip mill and looking to see a formal resignation. But back to Gove. He's in quite a unique position, isn't he? Because he was actually sacked. He didn't resign, and arguably, in my mind, that makes it a little bit easier to come back in the fray again, because you weren't Boris's number one fan, and actually an unprecedented statement from number 10 briefing to the press last night, calling him a snake. So clearly some animosity there. But the fact that he was sacked by the Prime Minister, does that make it easier for a new leader to come in and say, actually, I don't mind Michael, and he was doing a good job in the department, get him back in? Whereas if you've resigned, you've essentially walked away. And that maybe has different connotations. Do you think that makes it easier for us to think that within a few weeks or month that actually Michael Gove could be back in the department he was running, and then keeping this train moving forwards in the way that it has been already?
You would, in many ways, you'd like to think so, because Michael Gove has a track record of achievement. He also is the architect of the levelling up agenda, which I'm assuming at this moment, on what I said earlier, that this isn't a vote against the direction of the government. It's a vote against the leadership, that they would bring back the person who's most competent to deliver that. Now, that would be the logic if you were running a business. That's what you would say. You would bring back the person that, the steady ship person to take you forward. So I think yes, we will see Gove. It's whether he's tempered his ambitions and doesn't want to go for some other position. But I think, if I was one of the leadership candidates, I would be going to Michael Gove and saying, you're going to be an integral part of the plans. That's the way I would be looking at.
And in terms of the here and now, I think I'm right in saying the Department of Levelling Up no longer has any ministers left, and I think I saw at least 3 odd PPSs resigned yesterday as well. Yeah. So, I'm sure everybody joining has seen, on the news or on Twitter, the amount of meetings that have been cancelled in the forthcoming days, because they simply don't have the people to attend the meetings to govern them and actually do them and govern in the way that they need to and get these things through. How big a problem do you think that is? Because clearly, if there's nobody in the building, you can't get anything done. And that, to our first point in terms of where this leaves the reform bill, you're running the risk of bringing people in who don't have the experience. I think it's key that Eddie Hughes, for example, is still in position. He's, in my mind, being the spearhead but behind a lot of this work. So actually, from a bill perspective, hopefully we've kept some experience there. But there's going to be a personnel staffing problem here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Look, it's been 15 minutes and we haven't had a football analogy, but it's like sacking your manager in the middle of the transfer window, and not replacing them immediately. So Boris will remain the caretaker prime minister, but of course, who's going to work for him? So, he's not going to be able to bring in people who are going to want to be associated with him. So I think this is why I think there's going to be some very delicate negotiations post this announcement in the afternoon, which let's assume that Boris is allowed the luxury to remain as Prime Minister until the autumn. And to be honest, none of the leadership contenders are going to want to see anybody else in there because you don't want somebody who's already in the job, because once you're in the job, you could make a case that you'll keep the job. So I think
there's a natural progressive. If Boris does go today, you've got Dominic Raab as Deputy Prime Minister, who, for the best in the world, I wouldn't envisage being a leader of the Conservative Party in any other time, frankly. So he could be a good holding pattern individual for the next X amount of months to then see it through and actually keep some level of continuity. But it'll be interesting to see the effects on how the priorities change or remain the same. And I think your point around, a new leader coming in and then wanting to make some pretty quick success and bold statements. This is clearly an avenue that, one, is a vote winner. If you look at the way the paper is structured, it's answering a lot of the manifesto points of which people did vote for, and is pretty much halfway down the track. So it'll be interesting to see whether that March timeline changes, because for those of you viewing today who weren't on the last webinar, we were kind of went through the forecasted timeline, and we said that around October we expected the reform bill to get royal assent, and therefore delivering the bill in March 23. So that's the current school of thinking.
Yeah,
beyond the last
I agree with that.
24 hours, I don't think anything as informed as that should change. But of course, we're living in a time of change. Yeah. But talking about change, housing ministers. I think we're at one a year at least. This is akin to Tottenham Hotspur managerial circus for, pre-Pochettino, definitely, and in fact post-Pochettino. The housing minister job seems to be something that nobody really wants to hold on to. And I thought it was important we kind of just noted this, because we do have some major challenges in the housing market, and the housing market will often inform the rental market. What do you see? How much do you think this will affect things by having another housing minister, or are we kind of used to this merry-go-round? And actually, the Department of Levelling Up was really taking a lot of the stuff that was, really supporting or forcing through the change. What do you think the effect of this is?
I think it's exactly as you say. I think we are now fairly used to the fact that the person at the head of housing changes on a regular basis. I think the civil servants will be used to that. They've got a lot. They've done a lot of work. I mean, people don't really realise, that what goes on behind the scenes in the civil servants service. There's a lot of work being done on this white paper, a lot of consultation. That we can't allow that to be to go back to square one again. However, it does mean that subtle changes and different changes may occur. As we, when we go on and talk about some of the topics we were going to talk about today, before we knew this, then we said that they weren't set in stone. We said that they could be influenced and modified and changed, and so we know roughly now. And so we have a roughly what it's going to look like. So it's not going to fundamentally change, but there could be still some surprises in the pipeline on this.
And with that in mind, I think it's clear to everybody there's been a shortage of homes being built for a long time. The schemes that have been introduced have been tepid, at best, in my personal opinion. It doesn't really resonate with me that the change of a housing minister so frequently allows it to be a consistent approach to just simply home building in the UK. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this government over the next 2 years, presuming that we don't have a snap election, refocuses the minds on what they want, because they indeed do want more people to own their own home, don't they? That is the focus of this government, above and beyond anything else when it comes to renting versus sales. So it'll be an interesting time, Sean, to see what the new man or woman does in that role, and how much sort of passion and vigour that they give to it, because it's needed, and I think the inconsistency is not helpful. Looking at the reform bill, this has had cross-party support pretty much from day one. But a lot of the stuff around the reform bill was in many parties' manifestos. Do you think the reform bill will survive if there is a change of government? And albeit, again, we wrote this before the last half an hour, Johnson resigning. But it's not, it's possible that an election is called sooner than we thought. What's your view if there is a change of government here in regards to the reform bill itself?
I would say 75, 80% plus of what we've got in that white paper will survive. But certain things will be added, I think. And I think the thing that will be added if it is not, if we have a change of government completely, in terms of an election, which is we're not going to rule out, we know that the opposition will probably focus more on the rent and the rent control side of it, which we'll come back to, because hold that thought, I think, because that's quite important. I think if it's just a change of Conservative leader, I think I don't think they will go to the more, let me call them the traditional wing of the party, in terms of the non-interventionist low taxation side of the Conservatives. I don't think they will go fully to that side. They certainly will want a leader that is more friendly towards tax cuts and non-intervention, but they won't go the full hog. We know that a lot of the levelling up agenda, the so-called red wall seats, are looking for, and their constituencies are looking for, a more interventionist type government. So we know that is a lot of what's in that paper is popular. So I would say it would be, most of it will go through. I think there will be modifications on it, but most of it will go through.
And in terms of where sort of people's minds are at, we've got a few points on the Q&A here. So Alicia, good morning. Alicia says it's not about the reform itself, but what even the idea of it caused. Some landlords got so scared they decided to sell. I'm looking at the issue of decreasing number of properties to let in London and a high number of tenants looking to rent because their landlord decided to sell. What will happen in a year when all those landlords sell? Where will all the people go? And I think that's pretty consistent with the feedback we got in the last session. And the very idea that, you know, there's a potential that you're probably not as an agent going to manage more properties in a year's time than you do now, because it's relatively hard to grow and there's so few avenues of growth, and there's so many more letting agents, for example. That's a question mark. But I think Alicia's point around the effect on tenants here is a really, really good one. This renters reform bill set out to help tenants more so than ever before. And if you look at it line by line, I think it achieves that. Whether you agree with it or not, I think it achieves that. Yeah. However, some of all its parts have a real possibility, don't they, Sean, of increasing rents, of causing a lack in stock because of lack of confidence. Many other issues as to why landlords are not confident in the market at the moment, but this being one of them. And those two things combined actually have a negative impact on tenants. So do you think, and bearing in mind the renters reform bill is now going through a consultation phase, so putting aside the madness of the last 24 hours, the idea being that in the next X amount of months, you know, the department come back to the industry and consult on the points. Do you think there'll be any other changes in the bill or external to the bill that help answer those 2 points? Because rents are continuing to rise and stock shortage will continue to be insane.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's jittered the market, but to be fair, I think the market was jittery before anyway. You know, over the last few years with the tax changes and everything else, I think there's been a lot of people mulling over what their position, the older landlords or the more experienced landlords, have been mulling over what their position is. And for some of them, this is now probably focused them on making decisions and maybe, you know, selling their portfolio, reducing their portfolio, taking a retirement plan, whatever. I think that's inevitable. So this is just push this one forward. In terms of what changes could come about there, I think all we can say is that most of what's in that bill is not an existential threat to most landlords. Okay, it for most of them, and you know, the vast majority, 9 out of 10, I would say, it's going to be business as usual. Even as we're going to be talking about the periodic tenancy changes, most tenancies end naturally by agreement anyway. So there's not going to be the huge controversial issues of tenants digging their feet in and staying in the property for when they're no longer welcome. I think the reality is going to be that what you have to say is that planning ahead is going to be important. However, if you are a landlord and suddenly said, well, actually, this has focused me, have a strategic plan to come out of the market. So, you know, don't panic and just sell your whole portfolio at a loss for yourself. strategically do what you want to do. I spoke to a lot of landlords at the National Landlord Investment Show, which was the other day, and they were saying, yeah, what we're going to do is probably rationalise our portfolio. And you know what? This is a spring clean that has been well overdue for me. I've been carrying properties in my portfolio that I've just not been kind of motivated to get rid of, but now I'm going to start to rationalise and look at my business plan a bit better. So it's been positive for a lot of landlords in terms of them a wake up call and looking at what their strategy is going to be. But
and more than likely, I suppose, these properties, whilst going onto the open market, there's going to be new investors, new landlords out there, or existing landlords that want to further their horizons in the market. And with the cost of living crisis, one hypothesis would be it's going to become harder to buy a home because money is tight and inflation is soaring, etc. Interest rates increasing. So we may just see more consolidation across the landlord market, which means that actually from a stock fulfillment perspective, the numbers don't sort of peak and trough. Actually, it kind of remains the same. It's just passing from Peter to Paul. But it'd be interesting to see how that consolidation works because I know from the last private housing study. I think it was something like we had these stats on the last slide. I think it was something like 40% of the STs created were by somebody who owned 5 or more properties, for example. So there's a real difference between the demographic of landlords, as there are tenants indeed, and we're maybe seeing the wash up of the 2008 accidental landlord increase just essentially coming to its end, and then other landlords taking benefit of the properties coming to the market. But it'll be interesting to see how that demographic works and that consolidation. We've got a few more questions that have come in. This person hasn't left their name, albeit good morning to you. They say, very worrying, as we're a small funny business. We primarily let students. Our letting season, inverted commas, starts in October for rentals, starting the following summer. We need clarity on where we will stand with these changes to fixed tenancy terms. We've got some news on that, actually, which we're about to go on to the next slide around students and the fixed tenancy terms. It'll be incredibly hard for our business to adapt to the changes quickly. It could devastate us. In some ways, a delay is good, but not necessarily. We just need certainty so we can restructure and work out how to adapt. I think that's an extremely sensible sentence at the end there. The certainty allows our industry to adapt and change. And whilst we may have a view on whether the change is good or not, the change is coming, isn't it? So from a legislative perspective, it's about having the time to get it into place, get everybody educated, get your landlords and tenants educated. But I'm very hopeful to whoever that is. Like I said, they didn't leave the name. That this doesn't devastate your business. And actually, I think as we talk about students in the next slide, hopefully there's a ray of light there for you. We've got 2 questions in from Simon. Good morning, Simon. I'm a landlord, he says, not an agent. Everybody's welcome. I have a number of HMOs that I let students on 12-month ASTs. I have 2 questions. So number 1, Sean, we can all see the problem with the proposals within the white paper, but what are views on how this eventually may eventually pan out? Well, I think we've kind of covered that somewhat already in the sense that we don't probably see substantial change to the proposals, do we, Sean? The bill is actually being written already, and it's by all accounts from yourself, Sean. It's kind of halfway there in the actual detail, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it will be the fringes. So 2 areas. Just I'm speculating that I would expect. Definitely from the opposition side, will be over the actual notice periods. So there might be a little bit of a bun fight over, because at the moment, as we said last time, it was kind of changing the notice period from 1 month to 2 months for a landlord, for a tenant to give to a landlord. You can see as a positive thing for a landlord, because it gives you extra time to fill the void. However, I would say that there will be pressures on to reduce that for tenants, to make it more tenant focused. So we're going to have to watch that one. And the other area, I think, which will be up for modification will be, even if it's just on the interim, will be on what level of rent monitoring or control will go ahead. So those are the two areas I would say would be the biggest bump fights. But the rest of it is probably fairly straightforward, apart from bits of details which I quite rightly can see there are concerns about, but they are not fundamentals. They are things that will make a difference on the ground if they're not got right. But fundamentally, if they are right, then the overall proposals are acceptable.
Sure. And his second question is, apparently 60% of let properties are mortgaged. I think that is right as per the private housing study that was released not long ago. And as we all know, banks stipulate ASTs within their lending criteria. Are you aware, Sean, of how lenders are reacting to the white paper?
Well, they were involved in the roundtables. They were the ones, and that exactly was the situation on a number of those issues. What were the banks' reactions to this? Does it make the market more or less attractive for lenders to lend? And overall, I think the reaction from the mortgage lenders, or at least the people I've spoke to, is cautious, welcome of this. This will not change their lending criteria, but they are still looking at the fine details of it. So the reality is that they need to have that security of income coming in, but there doesn't seem to be too much of a threat to say that the market will become more conservative. I've heard people say, "Oh, yeah, that will make the criteria tougher," but the banking people I've spoken to, the lenders I've been speaking to, the representatives, said that this they can accommodate that within their lending criteria.
And I think the assumption there is that, and we'll come on to this point again, but that it's probably going to be business as usual. We've got to remember, tenants are finding homes. And there isn't a suggestion that property is going to be turned into short lets overnight because of this legislation, is there? So actually, there shouldn't be, and there's not being foreseen, significant change in terms of tenure or consistency to pay, etc. So I think that if the lenders aren't worried, often it's good reason for nobody else to be worried, because they're the guys and girls that are putting the money on the table, I suppose. But I think that's a very good question. Thank you for that. We'll do one more question and then we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll come back to the questions afterwards. But this one's from Joe Jackson. Good morning, Joe. Thank you for this session. Thank you for joining, Joe. Please, my question is, with the Renters Reform Bill, now tenancies are moving periodic, what sort of format of tenancy agreements can we prepare for our tenancy? So I think Joe's being quite specific here, Sean, in terms of the actual documentation, the contract that they can use, and where they would find that. Now, the changes aren't obviously enforced yet, so there's no need to change the contract you're using at all at the moment. And I imagine, Sean, there will be directive given in terms of clauses that will meet the new legislative terms, I would imagine.
Okay, yeah, so absolutely right. So it's business as usual. You use exactly the same tenancy agreements as you've been using in the past, okay, which I'm assuming that, if you've had them checked over, are all upfront and legal, don't contain unfair contract terms. Secondly, and to be fair, I've not met anybody who's using that, but there is a model constitution, a model tenancy agreement that the government has signed off and is on their website, which contains the clauses that they believe are acceptable and fair. The reality is that you will not be able to serve any other type of contract than your AST until the actual change date.
Yeah.
When the government announces it's going live, it will be there will be a 6 month kind of lead in for that. Then all new tenancies will become the new tenancy in the format that the government agrees, and then thereafter there's a further 6 months after that when if you've issued an existing tenancy, that it automatically defaults to the new tenancy. So any clauses in there that do not fit will be null and void. So right up to the minute that they announce the new tenancies are available, you can issue the standard tenancies that you're doing at the moment. What I would advise is, if they give you the 6 month lead in, there will be a model constitution, I hope, available at that time. Start using that rather than wait until the day before the mandatory for new tenancies and issue an AST there, because you're only going to have the benefit for 6 months anyway before it defaults back into defaults to the new ones. Does that make sense, Ollie?
It does, and it's worth noting actually for those who are joining who are Goodlord customers. Of course, we manage your agreements. We update your agreements mostly, unless you're using our bespoke ones. We'll support these changes through the process and make sure that the adaptations to those or the changing contracts are done at the earliest opportunity to ensure you're compliant. It's a nice segue actually onto the next slide, if we can, Sarah. Just before we do that, Joe also asked Sean how one could join the PRS. I would guess visit your website, give you a call, and they can talk through how to do that. Would that be?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right? Yeah, absolutely. So if you're an agent, you just go online and you can join automatically on that. If you're a property professional, then you can join on a voluntary basis as well. So that's brilliant. Yeah. So fantastic. It's www.theprs.co.uk.
Fantastic. So using the last point as a segue into talking about the single system periodic tenancies, we talked about this at length in the last session. And again, I think the recording's available actually if those who didn't join on our website at goodlord.co and go under newsagent. But one of the things that I think is worth noting is the fact that this really clearly affects renewals. And we got the impression in the last session we were kind of looking at the detail of the paper, and then we've had some time to think of the repercussions of that detail. And this will effectively mean, won't it, Sean, within 12 months of within 12 months of the legislation coming in, that agents no longer will have a need to renew contracts, and therefore we'll lose a revenue stream because of that. That's something that agents monetize, and they look to obviously at that stage do rent increases, for example. We know that part is changing, and that's going to go through Section 13, I think it was. But this is something that agents should be switched on to, and they should be planning for, isn't it, in terms of how their monetization of their business will change because of this legislation.
No, absolutely, and let's be fair. The majority or most common form of remunerations that agents have been participating, which is basically if you let a property, you take your letting fee over the period of the tenancy out of as a percentage of the rent charged, and if the tenancy rolls on, you get a renewal fee. We have seen other different models coming out on that. I think the way you've got to look at it is actually to say, I am valuing my service. This is what my service is valued at. What is the best way of me getting the value that I think I am entitled to for the service that I have provided? Which essentially, I have started to see people start to say, we are going to be charging upfront fees. So we're going to calculate what a let has been worth, and you pay that in advance. Because effectively, all you're doing from taking it from your rental income is you're putting them on a payment plan, aren't you?
Yeah.
You want to actually achieve what you want to achieve for the value of that lettings. In terms of that, I think if your landlords could tolerate that and want to pay up front, then a lot, try that model, and then just take the one-off fee for the let, and then that's fine. If you're continuing on with other services like rent collect or property management, then there's just like a monthly fee, I would say, and just charge those as a monthly fee for the length of the time that you're providing the business. Now, in terms of protecting your revenue stream and retaining your customers, that's what renewal fees, were put in place by letting agents, to do. They want to keep their customers. So if they say, well, actually, at the end of it, we'll take a renewal fee. If you leave us, we'll take a termination fee. I think you're going to have to start looking a little bit at those and saying, well, actually, does that work in the new regime? If you're keeping a landlord over the period of time, focus on the landlord, charge him an annual fee, and then spread that out over however you want to do it. But yes, it will change the way. But if you focus on what your service is worth and the value of it, and you're upfront with that, then you can say that's what we charge, and we believe we are worth that. To take that in the way that is most effective for you.
You're preaching to the converted here, Sean. I've held many a session, as some of the attendees today will know, over the last sort of 5-6 years, around sort of the value letting agents bring and how to protect and improve the fee. And I actually truly believe that this kind of change can be a good thing for letting agents, in the sense that it's actually bringing more barriers in some respects to making renting property harder, and that's where professionals shine. And I think, educating your landlords on, to Sean's point, the value you're bringing, but also educating them on what does this process actually entail? Because I'm pretty sure that a lot of landlords out there aren't aware of all these changes, and indeed maybe aren't even aware of changes that have been and gone. And there's an ability to educate there, but I do fully appreciate. It's very easy sat on a webinar saying that. You go into the open market and you've got 10 agents around you, all competing for the same property. It becomes a different story. But we are here to help on that front, whether you're a customer or not. And we run numerous roundtables and sessions and give content around how to look at the structure of your fees, how to consult with landlords, hopefully never running the risk of teaching you to suck eggs as letting agents or landlords, but really trying to sort of promote best practice and give maybe a few new ideas and tips that can help. But I'm conscious this change, on the face of it, will look like the way you monetize your business is being degraded. But I think, Sean, to your point there's other ways you can do that over a different amount of time and actually still add value and show your value and worth. So very good point there, Sean. Thank you. We've got one question actually come in that's pertinent to this from Katie. Good morning, Katie. Rent and legal insurance criteria also ask for an AST if the tenant needs to pay the term in advance. How will this be affected? You're right indeed. Rent and legal policies out there do include terms around having an AST or company-led contract in place. From a Goodlord perspective, I can only speak on our behalf. We'll be working with our insurers to ensure our wording is aligned with the new legislation. We don't foresee any mass change there as a result of this legislation. The view at the moment is that things will carry on as they have done previously. We don't think there's going to be huge chopping and changing in the market in terms of tenure. I actually think what we'll see is tenure get longer and longer. And I'd go back to our earlier point around the stock shortage that supports that. I think most people out there go and try and find their home, and when they're happy with that home, especially when there's a lack of stock out there, I think they'll stay longer. And indeed, if you look at tenure over the last 2 to 4 or 5 years, the tenure is increasing pretty much year on year, and I don't see that changing. So we don't see huge change of risk, and therefore I expect this to be a wording change, and nothing more than that at this moment in time. If there's other changes, please don't come back to me, Sean, and say, Ollie, you said on that webinar the day after the Madison 24 hours that there wasn't any changes. As we know now, that would be my view.
The reality, Ollie, both declare our interest. We both have insurance products that our companies are promoting. So that's declaration of interest. However, I do see that these sort of policies will become more popular. And, by the time we finish this slide, you will start to see that, you're mitigating your risks using insurance policies is a good way to iron out some of the potential consequences that will affect, albeit very small numbers of people, but when it does, might be quite significant. So,
indeed.
Carry on.
But thank you for the question, Katie. A pertinent one. Scrapping of Section 21, the cornerstone of the Renters Reform Bill, the sort of main news story, the scrapping of no-fault evictions, which I'll say it again because I've said it so many times, really winds me up, because I don't think landlords wake up in the morning and go, yeah, I'm going to cut the grass, I'm going to have some tea later, and I'm going to evict my tenant. There normally is a reason, but indeed, we are seeing Section 21 being abolished. It is going to go. That much is clear. However, we, from a contract perspective, actually, from an AST and product tenancy perspective, and from a Section 21 perspective, Sean, you think there's potential changes afoot in regards to students? Do you want to talk us through those?
Yeah, well, I think the initial kind of reading and initial talk to the government was that after consideration and looking at the student market, they didn't believe that there was a grounds for an exception for student lettings. And their argument with that was that although majority of students will only use student accommodation for the period that they are at university or college, a tenant may have, for whatever circumstances, want to remain in a property after their academic year, or if they fail to continue with the university, and they should have the same rights on that. I think the more that the people have been talking to the government, I think the more that they're starting to maybe say, well, actually, we need to actually have a look at this differently. And I think, to be fair, one of the people who've been foremost on this, not only because of his position as the CEO of the National Residential Landlord Association, but the fact that he is an HMO, a student landlord, is that Ben Beale has been talking to them and pointing out the potential risks of having not taking the student market into account. Now, saying that, I do think that the student market will change, and it will most likely have to. Partly, my personal view is, I think that if you are wanting to rent out properties on joint and several tenancies, student market, you may want to reconsider that. I think a lot of student landlords have already done that, put them on single tenancies, so therefore you have that flexibility. I think the issue of mixed tenure probably needs to be sorted out. So, a lot of the licensing schemes out there designate you as a student or a family let, and you could argue that you could have a mixed tenure of single professionals and students in the same property. I think we're going to have to look very carefully at the criteria on how you become a registered student provider. At the moment, it seems that those exempt properties are either owned by universities or purpose-built ones. Is there a scope for smaller single landlords to get their properties registered as approved suppliers, and then they will be exempt? So those are the sort of conversations that are going on at the moment. But I had another thought there, Ollie. This is another opportunity for insurance for void periods. What keeps a student landlord awake is that the tenants, fail their first term exams and then leave, and they can't replace the tenant because you're in the middle of the term, and the students are not going to come in and change properties at that stage of the game.
Sure.
So, there is scope for looking at maybe insurance products that cover that.
Well, I think the market is looking at this and figuring out how it can support agents and landlords alike. And I think a really good example of that is the new rules around pets. Look at that segue on to the next point, Sean. You've teed me up perfectly. And actually, only this week, I think a joint venture between Property Mark and I forget the name of the pet organisation. Forgive me.
For cat.
I think it may well have been that.
Jenny Baresi, yeah.
Yes, and they've pretty much now, it's been confirmed that this will be an insurance-led initiative, i.e. that landlords will have the right to mandate insurance for protection in the property against the pet that's permissible into that property. And that clearly, I think, from a landlord's perspective, is advantageous. I think my question mark around this is who and how. And what I mean by that is you can mandate the insurance to the tenants and say you must take it, but once they've taken it out, as you well know, Sean, I'm sure our viewers do, there's a 14-day calling off period with all insurance policies. How do you know if they've not then gone and cancelled the thing and you haven't got the protection in place? So is it actually a levy that's part of the rental amount the landlord has to take out? Well, that's administration that needs to be done. So it'll be interesting to see, and I don't know if you want any further insights, Sean, how that's actually going to work in practice, because there's pitfalls there potentially.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to sit down with the government and explain, the situation in detail to them. Other people may have had the opportunity to, but I did speak to my insurance guys, And one of the solutions could be to amend your landlord insurance to cover uninsured perils, a little bit like your car insurance covers people who hit you who are not insured. So you can, to the best of your ability, you can ask a tenant to take out a policy. If they lapse it or cancel it, then it wouldn't be, it wouldn't even be prohibitive to a premium to add that cover onto landlord insurance. To be honest, it would hardly make any difference on a risk profiling of that, because it's going to be so infrequent. If you're dedicated and love your pet, you will take out the modest policy that costs and absorb it. We've already seen them surveys saying that tenants out there are prepared to pay higher rents for properties that are pet friendly. So why wouldn't they pay out what would be a relatively modest fee for a pet insurance? It's not going to be huge amounts of money. I can't see them charging tens of thousands of pounds for tens of hundreds of pounds for insurance.
No, indeed.
Sorry.
But I don't think it's I don't think we're talking about widespread problems either. However, the problem will come at the point there is a problem. So the moment you need to make a claim, and if it's left to the tenant to do that, do they make the claim on time? Do they action properly? Do they, if by then they've left the property, do they have any goodwill to see that claim through and adhere to the terms of that insurance and ensuring that claim? So I think the how is going to be important here, just to get landlords peace of mind, because there's plenty of landlords out there which we have to acknowledge, rightly or wrongly, do not want pets in their properties, and they're not going to have the grounds to say no reasonably at the point that this is put in place. So I think making sure as an industry and as a collective of suppliers we have a sensible answer that is robust, I think is the right thing to do in my mind. And indeed, I'm sure, like many others, that's something we're working on already. But be aware, that bit has pretty much been confirmed now. So hopefully that's a bit more peace of mind for letting agents and landlords, that adds a level of protection when maybe there was a question mark as to how they were going to, or were landlords and agents entertaining more risk because of that. We've got a few more questions coming, Sean. I'm going to cover some of these, if I may. Ross, good morning, Ross. With a lot of flats in central London being furnished, do you think they will think about differentiating from unfurnished to furnished tenancies under the reforms, Sean?
Again, that was a question that we touched on last time, and very interesting, because the decent home standard that will be coming in says that the home provided should meet those criteria. But if you are selling it or renting it unfurnished, it won't meet those criteria. So I'm going to take the fifth on this one and say I don't know the full answer to that. I can't see how they would disrupt what is currently a workable market, because furnished properties are popular, as are unfurnished properties. Okay, and I think if you have a furnished property, then you have to take responsibility for that to meet the decent home standard when it comes to what you've put into the kitchen, the bathroom, whatever, the white goods. If it is down to the tenant to put them in, they've chosen to do that, then I think we need to say, well, actually, how does that affect the landlord when it comes to, if somebody goes and inspects it and they find that the kitchen is unsafe, and then the landlord says, well, actually, but that's the tenant's cooker and that's the tenant's fridge, nothing to do with us. So I think we need to actually iron that one out. It's a very good question.
No doubt we'll be sitting around this table, who knows, in a week's time, a month's time, 6 months' time. We will be doing this session again as we get more clarity, as we promised. But no, I think more detail needed there. Question from Lynn, just on a similar point. Good morning, Lynn. Can a tenant insure goods and furniture that does not belong to them, i.e. furniture and finished property, i.e. pet insurance? They can, Lynn. Tenants can insure themselves against accidentally damaging those kind of goods. And there is products out there that do that. Goodlord ourselves, we do indeed provide that level of service to tenants who go through our tenancy platform. But they can indeed at the moment, and I expect that side of the market to improve actually because of this legislation. I think you'll see innovation there and better products and services coming to the market. I'm conscious of time. Sean,
can I just add one quick thing on that?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, what's going to be paramount, I think, is making sure that robust inventories are in place. Now, that's to be done voluntary from the market. I'd like to see the government kind of edging people to having that as a document in place.
Sorry, I'm chuckling myself because Simon has come in on the question of pets, a light-hearted comment. Does that mean that when my student tenants phones up my agent to inform them there are mice in the kitchen, I can no longer instruct my agent to tell said students that their tenancy agreement stipulates no pets? No, Simon, unreasonably can't decline a pet. Although I think if you've got mice in your property, you've probably got bigger problems.
I think if your tenants are starting to feed and groom the things, then you might say. I mean, I remember when I was younger, it was, some random cat just came into our house and we adopted it. So nobody came and claimed it back. So, but I'm pretty sure that mice would be another issue.
Indeed,
under the decent home standard, no doubt.
We've got one more question in to cover, I think, or maybe two. But Sean, before we do that, we would like your views on the creation of the new Private Renters Ombudsman. We covered this last session. You gave some high-level thoughts. We've had a few weeks since then. Give us your thoughts on where this is heading.
Right. So. What it actually says in the white paper, they will create a single ombudsman for tenants. They've changed the direction from landlord, what we were calling landlord redress, to an ombudsman for tenants, which would be concentrating on the issues such as the decent homes and other complaints the tenants would have against their landlords. So it would be effectively levelling the playing field between those people who are members of the agents who are members of a redress scheme, but if they're self-managed, they're not getting it. Now, my view has been that if you're going to have a level playing field, it's got to be integrated. I still don't think the government has thought through the fact that huge numbers of landlords employ an agent precisely for the reason that they don't want to take the responsibility for managing that property. Okay, they've got the ultimate legal responsibility, but the day-to-day management, and involving them in having to register for a scheme and deal with those complaints where they may be remote, elderly, out of country, whatever, or not have the knowledge and experience to do it. It's exactly why they're using an agent. I think that's got to be thought through. And so the relationship between the new ombudsman and the existing ombudsman is going to be key. Okay, I am not convinced that that the one-stop shop for landlords is necessarily the way forward. I'm still adamant of that. I certainly want to say to the government, we totally accept that there should not be confusion. A tenant should have a one-stop shop for all these complaints. Is how it's taken down on that. But we're watching that space carefully. I also think that the three issues that are the biggest challenges for this is, one, is that tenants need to be educated about it. And the only people that are going to be able to educate them is going to be the landlords and the agents' responsibilities. So how do we make that, get the buy-in of the industry to say to their tenants, we have this mechanism for resolution, and it's in both of our interests to go down that route. I also think that if it's going to be a lot of repair issues, the system has got to be slick, it's got to be efficient, and it's got to be easy to administer. So I don't envisage that a system that takes months is going to be a workable situation. You basically, if it's just going to be a compensation scheme for situations in the past, then I don't think it's going to achieve what it wants to achieve. And I think it also has to actually integrate in with an enforcement regime as well. So it has to be a carrot and a stick. If you can't resolve this through the simple, cheap and consensus way, what are the penalties then if you don't abide by that? Because, what's the landlord going to do if I make a decision and they don't want to abide by it? I need to know if I was making the decision, what the consequences of that would be and what the enforcement of that would be.
And I take it you'll be included, or you'll be around the table in the coming months, hopefully consulting with the relevant parties within the department to make Absolutely. Those points and see where it goes. So I look forward to being hopefully informed by you, Sean, in months to come. We are out of time. We've overrun by 5 minutes. Appreciate there's one or two questions left there. I think one of them, actually. So I will cover it just in the interest of being one. Great session, guys. Thank you very much. This person has left their name. Hope you've enjoyed the hour odd for everybody that's tuned into view. More of an administration question regards the new proposed landlord portal register. Will agents be allowed to access this on behalf of their landlord clients? I don't think we have any clarity on that in terms of how it's going to work and what the access points and who's going to be running that, do we, Sean? So I think that's
okay. So subject to GDPR, I would say, and confidentiality. They've pledged they want the rogue register to be public. I wouldn't have a problem, or I couldn't envisage a problem if certain parts of that register portal, whatever you call it, is accessible to agents or any of the public. That's my view, as long as it doesn't breach GDPR or confidentiality.
One to keep an eye out in terms of how that's going to be proposed and utilised, but also what ultimately detailed in that. But good question, and for who you are, didn't leave a name. Thank you very much, and also thank you very much to all of you that have tuned in. We weren't sure whether we'd only get a few numbers on today, but actually we've got hundreds of you on today. Plenty of questions. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully that's been an informative hour. We've tried to sort of piece together the last 24 hours. We will be back with another instalment around the Reform Bill as time goes on and as more clarity and detail comes out. But for now, Sean, thank you very much. And to everybody else out there, thank you so much too. Have a great morning.
Thanks, Ollie.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.